Hello, everybody, and today we have the most amazing woman who I happen to know pretty well, and her name is Sharon Gist. Sharon is from Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Chris. This is an honor and a privilege, and boy, is it fun to set up this go-to meeting and do it together.
I know exactly, exactly. Sharon, I know you very well, and I know our viewers are going to know you a lot better after this, our little interview today. But what I wanted to do is I want to talk to you about your business, which to me is just fascinating. But before we do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about sort of how did you get to be Sharon Gist and where you're at right now? Because I have not met a more vibrant person in my life, and what you've done with business blows my mind. So take us on just a little bit of journey.
Well, it's a kind of interesting story, and I think of it as a kind of spiraling upward to get to where I am now.
Hmm.
Many, many, many moons ago, I was a teacher in New York City, and when I was like 21, I was going to revolutionize the school system, and I introduced some very innovative programs there, and burned out. After about 8 years, I was a tenured teacher. I had a job for life, and it was like, oh, no way, I can't do this another 20 years. So I took a summer job typing on Wall Street to learn more about the rest of how America thinks besides the way I was thinking. And in that process, I was planning to become a therapist for children. I thought if I could get them outside the school system, I could help the kids better. Well, I was fascinated on Wall Street. I noticed all of these people who were very alive and creative thinkers. And by the way, I got their attention as I was correcting the grammar on the reports I was typing up for them, even though I didn't really know what they were saying. And I became a municipal bond analyst. I actually went kind of both sides of the street. I worked for, uh, let's see, I worked for, it doesn't matter who I
Well,
worked for.
what was the
Anyway,
reason why from teaching kids to I'm so excited about you hitting the microphone. Teaching kids to a bond analyst, how do you make that jump?
well, it was very interesting because I had all these judgments, and I knew inside myself that if I was judging something, chances are there was something inside myself I was judging as well. And I was clueless. I had no understanding of how business worked or anything else. So I took the job originally because I wanted to learn how to type on an electric typewriter. That was why I did it. But then throughout the summer that I was in this job, I wanted to learn more about how business functions a little bit more. And my boss was curious if you had an intelligent woman and gave her an opportunity, what could happen? Because in those days, there were no women doing what I was doing. And he had this little group of women around him. So within the space of that summer, I went from being a typist to the head of the typing pool, to an assistant to one of the bond analysts, to his assistant. And at the end of the summer, when I got into graduate school and I was planning to become a therapist, I said, look, and I really had no money, no way of doing that. I said, if you're serious about making me a professional in a reasonable amount of time, I'd like to do this. So I stayed with him, and then about 3 months later, he left. So I was so unattached. I was more into the learning process than I was specifically what I was doing. So what happened was I went to another company as a municipal bond analyst trainee. I had cut my pay in half from teaching, and I was just learning, and I did not know the difference between a stock and a bond. I did not know anything. So I would read a prospectus literally and say, well, gee, if I knew what this word meant, I'd know what this sentence meant. If I knew what this sentence meant, I'd know what this paragraph meant. I knew nothing. And that's what I would do. I would go through the prospectus and see which are the words that I need to know what the meaning of. And then I'd go into my boss and say, what does this mean? What is assessed value? I mean, literally, I knew nothing. And within a month or two, I was one of the strongest municipal bond analysts that they had. And that company went through a transition. They were bought by Kuhn Loeb, which is where I'd been before. So I went to Fidelity Funds in Boston on the other side. I
Hmm.
was an analyst for buyers. And a couple of years later, every year I was doubling my income and beginning to get a bit of a reputation. And I came back to New York with a company that was actually insuring bonds. So it was a completely different place. And they were they had been a sleeper company. So I helped build them from $3 million to $17 billion over the next 10 years. And I
Wow.
was the sixth person in the New York office. And when I left, there were 120. But I burned out myself again on the way. And I looked, what do these two things have in common? Me, because teaching me what I was doing. So I loved being in service as a teacher.
Hmm.
What I loved about Wall Street was the business, and that I didn't feel like I was personally so responsible for the lives and the well-being of the children. But I was missing the fact that I had really had a commitment to children and advocacy for them. So when I left Wall Street, I became a licensed professional counselor, and I
Wow.
worked with children and families. I moved out west, started my life completely over, got a second master's degree, and I've loved working all my life. I've never I mean, the only time I probably didn't love it is when I was the teacher, and I changed it. I took ownership of creating my life, and money was not the issue or particularly the object. But when I was on Wall Street, one of the things I liked about it was that they paid you.
Hmm.
I made some serious money when I was there in today's dollars. And the people around me were making probably 10 times more. But the reality of it was that the money was the byproduct for doing a job well done.
Hmm.
And it wasn't like I loved being around people who were not afraid to spend some money too to
Hmm.
make things happen.
Uh-huh.
So
That's great.
bringing
But
it
and then
close.
you became a counselor. Did you have a specialty as a counselor?
Actually, I did. Well, I started out as specialist in play therapy. So I worked with very young children, and the state had a family that they had botched the treatment for.
Hmm.
These children, frankly, had been satanically, ritually abused, and nobody understood why they were as crazy as they
Oh my
were,
God. That's
and nobody
crazy.
would work with these kids. So I worked with them basically for free
Hmm.
for a couple of years, but it's established me as being able to work with very difficult kids. And then I also set up a play therapy program for a county. I set up a treatment program. It's called a day treatment program for young children, 3 to 5 year olds who had been sexually abused. Usually it takes about 2 years for one of these programs to get approved and licensed. And we were up and certified within 8 months. So
Wow.
I was doing a really good job with that too. That was kind of fun, but it was hard being the boss because I found that it was hard for people to be collaborative with the treatment program when they felt like their jobs were on the line with me. And it didn't even occur to me until after I left
Uh-huh.
that that was why there was so much resistance on the part of my staff. So in order for something to really work, I wanted everybody to have some ownership of it, to
Hmm.
feel like it was theirs too,
Right.
and not that they were just doing a job. And I think that that kind of brings us to the whole job mentality. I mean, when I left there, and my screen just went dark.
Well, I can
It's
see you fine, Sharon.
okay there. um, when I left there, I realized that what I really wanted was my own private practice. And I set up my home so that I could actually see clients out of my home. I did not work with really dangerous people.
Uh-huh.
I didn't, because I was working out of my home. Some
Right.
people thought I was crazy to do that. I also got supervision. I did not want to pretend I knew what I didn't know. I wanted support. So I had a supervision group. I had another supervisor that I worked closely with. I made sure that I could really deliver what I was promising.
Hmm.
And I had a small private practice. I was loving my clients one on one. I tend to talk a lot, as you notice.
Well, one of the things I was noticing, but after that private practice, though, I mean, you made this switch. Was there something in your brain that just said, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur now? I want to start this wildly successful business? Because I know you've made tons of money starting your own online businesses. What was that switch?
Well, what happened was I found that being a therapist, I actually felt like I grew myself up working with very young children. clearing any beliefs that I had about myself from my childhood, holding a space and honoring the people that I worked with. And I found that my clients were changing in nature. So
Hmm.
it went from, and I had a lot of different kinds. Otherwise, I'd go crazy dealing constantly with that kind of trauma and abuse.
Hmm.
And then I ended up working with teenagers, and then I ended up working with young women, and then I was doing some work with some young men, and pretty soon my practice was mostly adults and families, and I realized, I guess I've grown myself up here. And I also realized that I was playing a kind of small game, that I had a bigger vision for the world. I wanted to make a bigger impact than one at a time. And frankly, you know, I that 80-20 rule, it seems to be fairly pervasive. So even though people paid me for the services they received, and they stopped paying me when they were complete, so that was fine. But at the end of the day, when I look back at all of my clients, probably there were probably a percentage of them that didn't long term really get helped. I mean,
Hmm.
those children, I helped keep them at bay, but I don't know how much I really changed their lives, kind of thing. And I
Hmm.
wanted to change people's lives. I wanted to be a stand for something greater. And the biggest risk for me, frankly, was to get into a relationship. It was my weakest point, and if I'm going to be counseling marriages, I had to learn how to have one. So during this whole time, which I hadn't said anything about, but I got my degree in spiritual psychology, a master's in
Mm.
California.
Mm.
And I was in New York the first year, the second year, that's why I moved out west. I was in Oregon, and I used to drive 12 hours each way, once or twice a month, to be an assistant at this incredible university.
Hmm.
And I decided, well, you know what? Maybe you ought to just move to California if you meet somebody in California, or stay in Oregon, but you got to stop doing this commute because it's pretty crazy.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up, a friend of mine from the university, we spoke long distance, and we decided we were going to get married. And it was like one of these intellectual decisions. So I moved to California, left my private practice,
Where's the
and
passion, Sharon? Where's the passion?
the passion came when I decided, wait a minute, this MLM world is set up for failure. I am going
Ah.
to turn that upside down. Right now, 3% of the people in multi-level marketing are successful, 97% fail. I went into a multi-level marketing company in financial services, which if I couldn't do it, nobody else could either. I was in the top 100 out of 15,000 people, and after
Wow.
3.5 years, my best year, I made only $14,000 or something. This is not good.
Right, right.
So I,
Oh, you can
oh
ignore the
dear,
phone.
ignore the
Ignore
phone.
it.
Sorry about that.
No worries. But you,
So the bottom line was, I did this company, and I just suddenly got clear one day. My purpose is to live joyfully in partnership with God, inspiring and leading thousands of others to live their dreams.
hmm.
And I realized I wasn't doing any of that. I wasn't joyful. I wasn't living my dreams, none of that. But I knew I was on the right track. Being an entrepreneur, finding the right vehicle. And about 2 weeks after I got that clarity,
Hmm.
somebody introduced me to a personal development direct sales company where I made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I loved doing it. But again, the people around me weren't being successful, and I didn't know how to translate it.
Hmm.
And that company eventually imploded because the the founders, were clashing, and
Right.
they didn't have the vision and the direction. And what I realized is that I wanted to be a soul centered entrepreneur. I wanted
Oh,
to
I like
work
that.
from the foundation of spiritual principles of service, but I also wanted to make a lot of money and help a lot of others make a lot of money. So I floundered for a little bit, trying to find exactly the right place.
Well, I want to
And I
stop you right.
have to,
I want to stop you right there, Sharon, because one of the things that you mentioned that really strikes me, and I think a lot of our viewers are going to really pick up on the fact that you have this amazing business right now, and I want to get into that in a second. But throughout your journey, if you will, teaching children, training bond people, being a spiritual psychologist, and then going into a personal development company. This common thread to me seems to be that you want to be in service, that it's all the basis of your belief is that you want to be in service and help other people. Where do you think that came from?
It came from the place that I recognized as a child that the world had to be that I had to have more ability to change things than it appeared on the surface. And if I bought into, you're set by the time you're 5 years old,
Uh-huh.
then I would have, my life was a mess. I mean, I came from a very, very dysfunctional family. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And my little sister died when I was about 7 or 8. My mother died when I was about 13.
Mm.
And I wanted to, I just knew there had to be more than this loneliness and upsettedness that I was living.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that and I love learning. I love knowing that I can make changes. And it was a light bulb that went on for me when I took 100% responsibility for everything in my life.
Wow.
I had an exercise that I was doing in a workshop once where they said, tell your worst victim story and convince your team that you really were a victim. And then they had you turn it around and say why you really weren't a victim, how it served you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only one in the group who could tell the story so powerfully that they bought it. They bought into my victim story. And then it was incredibly
Well,
empowering.
you are
to turn around.
persuasive.
What?
You are persuasive.
Well, I didn't even know that. But what was really valuable to me was to turn it around and see all the gifts I got from my sister's death and my mother's suicide, frankly, that I was able to move forward. All of who I became and the strength that I have came from the loving. I have incredible family. I have 4 sisters who I adore. I have an oldest one and the youngest one that died. And being able to move through our lives, I mean, with the kind of childhood we had, we could have all ended up in mental hospitals or jail or on drugs, and none of that.
Like half of
Women.
America, Sharon, like half of America.
Well, we are just incredible women. I am so impressed by my older sisters. And so the service came as I realized I had privileges. I mean, when I was on Wall Street, I realized that I had automatic privileges just frankly by being white and pretty.
Uh-huh.
Sorry. And I thought, this is crazy. I want to be able to make a positive difference. So frankly, my first company, I hired a whole staff of Black women in the typing department. The only Black person in the entire company had been in the mailroom. I actually changed the color of the company.
I love it. I love it. Touche.
And part of it is that I believe in people. I believe that people want to make a positive contribution. They just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And they the reason that they fail in business is that they reach out to 2 people and they get 2 no's and they go, oh, this is hard. Or they get somebody into a business and that person doesn't do anything or make any money. And they say, I don't want to talk people into something and then have them lose their money. I mean, that happened for me when people were giving me $20,000 for products and then enjoying the products, but not making the 20,000 back. I didn't feel good about that. and I know that the law of attraction is about feeling good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what's really cool too about what you're doing with this is, I frequently ask people what's their passion in life. And to me, you being in service and helping other people is really your passion. And it just comes through so vividly.
Well, Chris, it surprises me to realize how true that is. I am doing something now that I never in a million years would have thought I would do. I am having more fun and working a bazillion hours doing it. and it's happening in a whole new way. And it's almost like everything that I've been doing is lined up. It's like I went from kind of teaching social work to business, divorcing myself from, in my opinion, being of service, then going back to being in service as a counselor, but in a very small, contained way, and then going back into business in a way that, frankly, I lost my shirt, financially.
Uh-huh.
But I made a ton of money and I lost a ton of money. Let's put it that way. And now I've got it all combined. I'm being in service. I'm in business. I have the potential to make unbelievable amounts of money that I can't even